Morning, Stanley.
Good morning. How are you today? Yeah, that's good enough.
As a friend of mine used to say way back when, at least I'm not pushing up daisies. Yeah. Are you as lost as I am with this stuff? Hanan,
Good morning.
good morning. There's going to be a test at the end of the day, by the way.
It's a pop quiz.
Pop quiz, exactly. And it's not multiple choice.
It's a short response. Okay, well, I'll just make it up like I usually do. You know. Just, you know, should just say one side says this and the other side says this, and you know, one version says that and the other version says, you know, says
And
that.
there's no conclusion. So just the question is, what does your rabbi paskin today is what it boils down to.
Well, yeah.
So there's two answers to that question. If you have a machloket, if you have a halachic question, you have to ask the right rabbi. Or the other one is, if you have a halachic question, don't ask any rabbi.
There we go.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay. Morning.
Okay, we're at the very bottom of 16b, 15b, Teselav Amud, and we're discussing, it's an extended discussion about, have a 50-50 split between open space and closed space in your virtual wall. Okay, so the Mishnah's statement seemed to allow for both. Like, it depends how if you're talking about 50-50 and you say if A is more than B or if B is more than A, that has different implications for exactly equal. Okay, so it's, and we had two opinions in the Gemara. One is Rav Papa that says 50-50 is considered enclosed, and the other one was Rav Huna, who said 50-50 is considered not enclosed. And the Gemara is going through an extended series of attempts to prove it one way or the other, and each time the Gemara will kind of wiggle out of the implication of the statements of the brises that it brings. And in the end, I'm sorry to say, not to spoil the surprise, but it's not really a satisfactory ending in terms of being conclusive proofs. The Gemara does decide one way or the other, but it's unclear exactly why it does so, as you could read most of these sources either way, if you wish. Okay, so the second last line, Tashma. There's a brisa. Shayara shachansa babika. If you have a caravan that camps out in an open space, a valley. V'kifua for Shabbos. V'kifua b'gmalin ba'ochos ba'avitin b'shlifin b'kanim b'kolchos, and they made an enclosure made up of camels and saddles and all these other pieces of equipment, they kind of pile up and put together and make a wall, right? The Talzul B'Socha you can carry within that enclosure. As long as you have the gaps between the pieces of this wall, it's using the camel as the paradigm, the gaps between the camels are no larger than the camel itself. Or the gaps between the saddles, basically any section of the wall that's filled in has to be at least as big as, or to be precise, has to be at least as big as the filling in piece. Etc. So this appears to say that if it's equal, it is forbidden. It does not make a valid partition, and so this seems to go like Rav Huna. So Gemara answers Hachanami here, as we said yesterday, Kishenichnas v'yotze. We're talking about not where it's exactly the same, but there's a little wiggle room there so that you can slide in another piece in the open space of equal dimension. And if that's the case, that means it's a little bit larger than the dimension we're talking about. So in that case, the reason that it is no good is that the open space is actually a little bit larger than the closed space.
They made a wall from all their stuff.
I'm sorry?
They made like a wall around their whole camp with all their stuff.
Yeah.
And in that wall, within that, it's like the Reshut HaYachid, they can carry.
Right, exactly. Think of covered wagons, right? Circling the wagons.
Okay.
Okay, so you can't prove anything from this brisa because you could interpret it either way. 50-50 or a little bit more than 50-50 is what is not valid. Tashma, here's another proof. Nimse Sato Omer, Shlosh Mios B'Mechitzas. So another brisa tells us that there are three measures or three situations in walls. Kolshu Pachos Mishlosha. If it's less than 3, if the width of the filled in parts is less than 3 tvachim wide, tzarich shelo yehei bein zeh lezeh shlosha. So then it has to be that have gaps of 3. So in other words, we're going to imply that equal is no good. Kadei shelo yizdaker hagedi b'vas rosh. So that a y3 tvachim, so that a goat, which for some reason seems to be the criteria for walls here, is how effective it is against goats. So a goat can't jump through the gap. Kolshu shlosha umishlosha ad arba. But if the filled-in section is 3 up till 4 tvachim, sarich shelo yehei bein zeh lezeh kimlo. It has to be that, for it to be valid, that there is not 3 or 4, whatever the built-in section is, you can't have the equal to be the same size. So that the open area is not equal to the filled-in area. So if you'd notice, so like these are stated in one is stated one way in a positive way, and the other is a negative way. So the Gemara will try to deal with that. And if the open part is more than the filled-in part, then you can't even plant. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned what we're talking about here is not for Shabbos, right? This has to do with where you can plant 2 different types of you're not supposed to plant 2 different types of things in the same plot, right? So what walls them off, like what separates the plot? So it's the same kind of thing, right? If you have these partial walls and filled in gaps or virtually filled in gaps, and that's a wall. So
how does this relate to, remember a few years ago, or more than a few, there was these battles between these communities in Brooklyn for cutting the Eruvin. Was there a specific gap that they were leaving, or was it just cutting the wire in one place?
Okay, so broadly you're asking, like, how does this how does this relate to our current modern day Eruvin? So first of all, if I'm not mistaken, a modern day Eruv is basically composed of inverted U's, right? Suras HaPesach, a doorway, okay? And so there are more leniencies when it comes to that. If you just have a wall without, a gap in a wall that doesn't have the top covered to make it a doorway, that's a different situation. The doorways can be, there's a lot more room to work with them, okay? So obviously, like any modern day Eruv has, it's all gap, right? There's no actual wall, but because we use it Suras HaPesach, because we use the inverted U, that is more able to count as a wall. You don't have to see it as, it's not as virtual as a gap in a wall.
But weren't they using I don't know, strings or the telephone wires or something in Brooklyn to
Yes, exactly. And that's what we use largely as well. And again, the wire over the top of the posts, that's not a lechi anymore, right? A lechi is just a post, right? But a Suras HaPesach, a doorway, a virtual doorway, is two posts and a lintel.
Mm-hmm.
That is, now when you cut that, when you remove the lintel, right, then you don't have anything. You might just have a lechi, you might just have a post, but then you get into the problem of, well, there's too much space, right? With the doorway, with the lintel included, you don't have to worry so much about the how wide the doorway is. When you make it not a doorway anymore by removing the lintel, then you have a problem with space. Did I get that out right? Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So what this Bryce is saying that if this enclosed plot of land in which let's say grapes are planted, if it's enclosed by a wall that has more open space than standing space and filled in space, then you can't even plant the grain of the different type, even if it's separated by the filled in part of the wall, it's still not valid because the whole thing is not considered enclosed and it's merged with the next, with the adjoining plot. Okay, and kol shehu arboa u'me'arboa ad eser. What about if it's 4 and a bit until 10 amos, ad eser amos? If those are the gaps, then you need not to have the same dimension of space in between the two standing parts, so that you don't have more open space than filled in space in the wall. And if it was equal, then then you can't plant next to that. You can't plant like cross border in the open space, but you can plant in the closed space. So if you have, two plots adjoining, if there's nothing and you've got a wall that's 50-50, right? Half of it is separated by a wall and the other half is not. So you can't plant like next to each other, the grain on one side and grapes on the other side. But where the filled in part of the wall is, you can. Okay, so now, and then the Brisa finishes off. Nifra sabioser miaser aser. 1 second, where am I up to? Okay, b'maya omed merubal parts, and if the wall area was more than the open area, afkagana parts mutar, then the wall is considered complete, and you can even plant, right next to each other across the border, even in the open parts. The two different types. But if there is a gap of more than 10 amos anyway, then they're not considered separate. And if you have like poles stuck in the ground as a partition, and you weave kind of a covering, you weave them together at the top, not a covering really, but you put a cross thing woven into the tops of the poles. So it makes like a, it covers them at the top, so it's filled in. Then even if if you're filling the gap with that, then it can even be more than 10 amos. Then it is considered a partition. All right, so now we're going to analyze the language. So the first clause of the Mishnah says, from 3 amos to 3 tvachim to 4 tvachim separated. Then it's good. As long as you don't reach the 50-50 mark, right? So if you do reach the 50-50 mark, then it's no good, right? Chiyufta de Rav Papa, that contradicts Rav Papa. Rav Papa is the one who said 50-50 is okay. And by saying that as long as you don't reach 50-50, you're okay, then that implies that 50-50 is no good. Rav Papa answers nichnas via, say the same dodge we had before, that it doesn't mean exactly 50-50, it means 50 and a little bit, right, in order to slide in another piece with ease. And this makes sense to interpret it that way. Because the next part of the brisa says, if the open spot was larger than the filled-in spot, then even in front of the filled-in part, that's not considered. Even the filled-in part is not considered a wall. So, but if it is 50-50, that implies that it is a good partition. So you could, so that's a good proof for Rav Papa. So if it's a good proof for Rav Papa, the second clause of the Mishnah, then maybe that contradicts Rav Huna. So he would say no. Look at the end of the Mishnah. If the standing area is larger than the open area, then it's permitted. That means if it's 50-50, it's forbidden, right? In other words, this Mishnah is very ambiguous in terms of the 50-50 case, because it's stating its different clauses using different approaches. Up till 50-50, from 50-50, right? You can deduce opposite things from each clause. Seifa Kashal Rav Papa, Reisha Kashal Rav Yehuda. Gemara says, yeah, this Mishnah is a contradiction in itself. The first clause contradicts Rav Papa, the second clause contradicts Rav Huna. So Gemara answers, Seifa Rav Papa Lokasha. I'm not bothered by the fact that the end of the Mishnah, the language is against Rav Papa. I did a ton of Reisha Paras Merubal Omed, since the style of the Mishnah started out with using that expression, A is bigger than B. So Tan Seifa Omed Merubal Paras. So it uses the A is bigger than B, or B is bigger than A construct in the end of the Mishnah. So don't take it for granted. Don't take the end of the Mishnah's language precisely. Take only the beginning of the Mishnah's language precisely, and then assume that it follows my opinion. The only reason it's stated the opposite or implied the opposite at the end is because it's just following the kind of literary style. Okay, but of course you could ask the you could say the same the opposite way, and that's what I was going to say. Rachel Arhuna, Reda Rav Yeshua Akasha, and so Rav Huna wouldn't be troubled by the beginning of the Mishnah, by the first clause of the Mishnah seeming to oppose him. Why? I did it by the Mishnah Seifa. Since you're going to use the phrase B is bigger than A, so use the phrase A is bigger than B, but really it's A equals B is also. So Rachel Parsman. Okay, so it's, in other words, this Mishnah is inconsistent, internally inconsistent, so you could, make it come out whichever way you want. If you're going to explain it away by saying in one part it's not being precise, you could say either whichever way suits you. The first part is not being precise, or the second part is not being precise.
It's following the basic rule of this is the way things are, excepting when it's not.
Right, or, well,
because there seems to be a lot
the
of
interesting thing is that that it goes both ways, right? Like, one party takes the same set of facts, if you will, as a proof for its side, and the other does the same, and eliding over the difficult part, the part that doesn't agree with you, right? You say, that you can ignore, right? So not a very good argumentative technique.
No. Can you clarify what is this nichnas v'yotze thing? that Rav-
Nichnas v'yotze is if you're sliding pieces in between, you have two pieces here, right? And we're talking about the width in between them. So to slide in an equal width piece, there has to be a little bit of a little bit extra room to make it easy to slide in the other piece, meaning that it's not flush, right? If it were flush, it would be hard to get in the new piece. If it's not flush, that means there's a little bit more open space than there is filled in space.
If it's not flush, it would be more.
If it's not flush, that means because there's more of a gap, right? There's a little extra room to slide in the other piece.
Okay, so
then it's not 50-50 anymore, right? Then it's more open space, a tiny bit more open space than filled in space.
everybody agrees that if it's not 50-50, it's no good, right?
If it's less than 50-50, yeah, right.
Everybody agrees.
I mean, more than 50-50. Yeah, if there's more open space than filled in space, everybody agrees, right?
Right. It's like a sukkah, right? Like
Yeah.
a sukkah.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Okay. So if it's exactly 50-50, but then Rav Papa is saying that it's really not 50-50 because it can be.
Right. Rav Papa is saying, well, where it says that 50-50 is not considered a wall, Rav Papa explains that away by saying it's not really talking about 50-50. It's talking about 50.1 plus 49.
Rav Papa is very saying you never get 50. There is no case for 50-50.
No, there is a case of 50-50, but when a Mishnah or a Brisa says about a 50-50 case that it is not a wall against me, right? Because I say it is a wall, right? I say that's okay. When the Mishnah says it's not the case, it's not really talking, even though it says it's talking about 50-50, it's not really talking about 50-50. It's talking about where it's 50.1 open,
I see.
9.9 closed. And then, so that's why, or the other way around, I'm sorry, wait.
That's why he doesn't really see a case that there could ever be 50-50.
No, that's not what he's saying. There is such a case, but the Mishnah never talks about that.
He never talks about the case.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the same. That's kind of the same. But okay, all right.
All right. Bishlam al Rav Papa. So, okay, I understand Rav Papa. Mishum hachi lo arev lahu v'tani lahu. So that's why the Brisa doesn't combine the first two cases, like less than 3 with exactly 3, because if it's exactly 3, then it's 50-50, and it wouldn't be in the same category. El Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua, but according to Rav Huna, who says that changes the status le'arvinu v'lisninu. So, like, why are you distinguishing between the 3 and 3 plus a bit? Kol shu pachad mishlosh shlosha. It should have said a little bit less than 3 or 3 exactly. Sorry, then you don't want to have 3 in between, 3 gaps, 3 tvachim gaps. Because sure, they're both invalid walls, but for different reasons, right? Psul d'reisha, the invalidity in the first clause where the sections are less than 3 tvachim wide. That's kedei shelo yizdaker hagdi b'vasachos. That's because they're not wide enough for a goat to go through, and that's why it's considered a good wall. Psul the seifa, but the second reason for it being invalid, where the sections are at least 3 tvachim wide, that shalei parts gomed, that's a different reason. It has nothing to do with goats. That's because because you don't want a 50-50 case. Okay. Now, we haven't really resolved what we think, who's right on the 50-50 case, Rav Papa or Rav Huna. We're going to go off on a little tangent for a minute. Pachos mishlosha. The Brisa had talked about less than 3 tvachim and 3 tvachim money. So who is this Brisa? Who's the author of this Brisa? Rabbanan he. It's the rabbis, right? Who said Pachos mishlosha amrin lavud. If it's less than 3 tvachim, then you can have a virtual extension. Lavud. Shlosha lo amrin lavud. But if it's 3 exactly, the gap. If it's 3 or more, then we don't say that, and we don't say lavud. We don't extend it. But wait a minute, Ema Seifa, what about the second clause? Shlosha umi shlosha ad arba. If it's exactly 3 or up to 4, then yeah, then the if the gaps are up from 3, a little more than from 3 up to 4, then the filled-in sections are not valid either. Asal Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. That goes like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel the Amar, who said, "Pachos me'arba lavud." His rule for the extending for the virtual extension of the wall is 4 tefachim, not 3 tefachim. Yirabanan, because if it's a rabbi, it's mishlosh v'yarba. What's the difference? Like between 3 and 4, the rabbis say the maximum you can do this virtual extension is 3 tefachim. So like, why are you giving me a separate category from 3 to 4? If you're giving me a separate category up till 4, then that part must be like Rosh Shimon Gamliel. So which is it? Is it like, how come the brisa combines, or in one brisa we have a mix of the opinions of Rabbanan who say lavud is maximum 3 tefachim, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel who says lavud is maximum 4 tefachim. What's going on here? Rabbi answers, Mida Reisha Rabbanan, since the first clause is according to Rabbi, Sefer Namar Rabbanan. We have to explain the second clause also according to rabbis. Umoda Rabbanan dechol lomishra kenegdo. So the rabbis say generally lavud only works up to 3 tefachim. But when it comes to this planting of kilayim, of mixed species, then the chol mishra kenegdo, if you're planting opposite the open section, right? If you're planting opposite the closed section, then we have more of a leniency, right? Like if there's the actual wall between the grain and the olives or whatever it is, then we can be more lenient concerning the extension of the wall to consider it covering the gaps, because the opposite grains are separated by the actual wall, not the virtual wall.
Makes sense.
So if there's a place of 4 tzvachim, we consider it still part of the wall. V'lo lo chashiv. If not, then it's not. Then the wall is no good. Rava answers differently. I mean, the Sefer Rav Shimon Gamliel, since the end of the brisa is like Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says it's a 4 tefach gap that you can cover virtually. Rav Shimon Gamliel will also say the beginning, which spoke about 3 tefachim, is according to Rav Shimon Gamliel. So why then 3 tefachim? Isn't his opinion 4 tefachim? Rav Shimon Gamliel, Amrina Lavud, Hani Mile Lamala. When Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says 4 tefachim is it's okay to extend virtually the partition by 4 tefachim, that is at the top of Olamata, but at the bottom, we've seen this before, then it's not a wall at all, right? You have to, even I, Rav Shimon Gamliel, will lower my allowance for a gap to 3 tefachim, because if it's 4 tefachim, then it's really not a wall, and goats can go underneath.
I thought we were talking about the gaps were horizontal, right? Now he's saying the gap is vertical.
Yeah, so I think what we were talking about is
This 50-50 was about horizontal gaps, right? I mean, you got a wall, a gap, and a wall, gap.
Yeah. So what does it mean here at the top?
What are you talking about? That the wall doesn't go down to the ground or something?
That sounds right. So let's see.
And then the goats can go underneath it. It doesn't.
Yeah, so he could be talking about like a beam at the top that doesn't quite reach the end. But if it's at the bottom, it doesn't. One second. Good question.
I'm just kind of. Yeah, Rashi, Takton Lakarka, Pachot Megimel.
All right. I mean, can we say that if the horizontal gap is close to the ground, it's easier for the animals to get through.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I'm trying to picture this goat.
Sorry?
Before I thought the goat was sliding through the gaps.
Yeah, now we're talking about going underneath the gaps. But we're also talking about gaps in the wall, like horizontally.
Oh, we're talking about both here? Okay.
Yeah, it's a little unclear. That's true.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just.
Okay, yeah, good question.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go back to let's go to another brisa to try and figure out what the rule is for exact 50-50. Tashma, if these walls are mostly doorways and windows, it's fine. As long as the filled-in parts is greater than the open parts. Sure. So wait, that's a contradiction in terms, right? Like if it's mostly windows and doorways, that means it's mostly open, right? So what does that mean? So where it says Sharuba and Salkadata, is that really what you're trying to say? Like that's a contradiction in terms. Ella Shariba Bahem Sachim Smutar. Reread it. It's not that most of it is that you made many windows and openings. So then you can say you have many windows and doorways as long as there's more wall than open parts. Right? Okay, so anyway, so the language implies that that there has to be more filled in parts than open parts. So 50-50 would be okay, right? For it to be no good, there has to be more open parts. So 50-50 would be okay. So that seems to 1 second. And then the Brisa continues, as long as the filled-in part is more than the gap. So if it's then it's fine. But if it's 50-50, it implies it's not fine. That contradicts Rav Papa. Even so, we accept the view of Rav Papa for halacha. The Gemara says, well, what's the point? Why do you go through all this trying to prove it? And then you say, oh, it doesn't matter. We're going to rule like Rav Papa anyway. What's that about? The Gemara says, yes, Mishum Dedaika Masnishin Kavase, because our Mishnah is more easily explained, or seems to support Rav Papa. It's not, which said, Lo Yehu Prutos Miseros Ela Binyan. As long as the openings are not more than the filled-in parts. Halka binyan muta, that implies that if it's 50-50, then it's fine. So, like, I don't really get that either, because we said that could be explained away by Rav Huna.
We just went through all of this.
Yeah.
And we basically said,
yeah, we won't really.
Well, half the opinions rule this way, and it was basically 50-50 on the opinions, too.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah.
so we rule like Papa because it's 50-50, and he says it's okay for 50-50, so we're just going to go with that.
Yeah.
They just
it was, like I said at the beginning, it's kind of unsatisfactory.
Well, they just gave up, basically. They went through all of it, everything else can be explained. So,
yeah, lots of times we say teku, right? Lots of times we don't know.
Right.
We'll just have to wait until LEO comes and resolves it or something.
It's just a theoretical issue anyway, because
yeah, how are you going to measure exact, right?
Right. I mean, we just move the wall a little bit one way or the other.
Yeah, so you'd think this is the perfect place to say teku, right?
Right, that's true.
I mean, like you think about the caravan situation, all you have to do, if it is really 50-50, is just reduce the perimeter a little bit. Just move it in, right? And then all of a sudden, right?
Right. That's an easy fix. Maybe that's why.
Okay, next Mishnah. So we're going to continue to discuss the situation of a caravan. What you can do to surround your camp is you can have 3 horizontal ropes, one above each other. As long as there's no more than 3, as long as there aren't gaps of 3 tefachim in between them. right? So you have like a rope fence, right? As long as there's no gap of 3 tvachim or greater between the ropes, then you can and now again, these are leniencies that were established specifically for caravans because of the nature of, remember this is all rabbinic anyway, so the rabbis recognize that they're in a situation that A, is not likely to be repeated another time or picked up by somebody else improperly, and B, they need to be able to function on Shabbos. Shir chavalim va'obion yasser al tefach. And now in this case, the thickness of the rope must be more than the tefach. So these are pretty thick ropes. Kadei sheyehei hakol, maybe it's more like strips of material or whatever. It doesn't have to be a rope. Kadei sheyehei hakol asar tefachim, so that at least the partition, including the gaps and the ropes, is 10 tefachim. So, the Gemara will go through the different scenarios, but basically you have a gap of 3, a rope of a tefach, another gap of 3, a rope of a tefach, another gap of 3, and a rope of a tefach. So you're over 10 tefachim. B'shayara dibru. Sorry. Skip something. Makifim b'kayim. You can also surround your camp with vertical poles. Again, you can't have gaps of 3 tvachim or more. Now, b'shayara dibru. These rules apply to caravans, but not to individuals. Divur Rabbi Yehuda. So this is Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim omrim lo dibur b'shayara lo b'hofen. No, rabbis say it applies to even an individual who's traveling. The only reason it mentions a caravan is that's the way people usually travel. People don't usually, go off by themselves. They usually go in caravans. Here we have a surprising statement. Any wall that doesn't have cross pieces, like the vertical and horizontal weave, is not considered a wall. If it's made of ropes. So that's what Rabbi Yossi said. It could be one or the other. So the first part of the mission is clearly going according to the Chachamim, right? It could be either vertical or horizontal, but Rabbi Yossi says you have to have both in order to make this kind of virtual wall. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hamnuna, Amar Rav Hamnuna said, Hare Amru, Omed Rubal, Paretz V'Shasi, Have Omed. We already said that if you've got vertical wall pieces, wall segments, and as long as there's more filled in parts than open parts, that's fine. What about if it's horizontal ones, right? Like our Mishnah talked about, right? When you have horizontal pieces, do you have to have more? You have to have the majority part as part of the rule. Like, does most of it have to be filled in? So clearly our Mishnah would say no, right? Amar Abaye Tashma. Abaye says, let's prove it. Shir chavalim va'obion yasser al tefach. Our Mishnah said that you have to have the ropes have to be a tefach thick. Sheyehu hakol asar tefachim, so that you have a total of 10 from the ground. V'isa, now if it's so that the partition is valid, even if only a majority of it is solid. So what do you care if the rope is more than tefach? You don't need a thickness of a tefach for the rope. It could be less than that. Then you'd have so there's a picture in the art scroll here, but I think it's pretty obvious, right? If you have a gap from the ground of 3 tvachim, then a rope, then another 3 tvachim, then a rope, then another 3 tvachim, then a rope. So you could still make it to 10 tvachim, like you've got gaps of 9 altogether, right? So you don't need 3 more tvachim of 3 ropes, right? You only need 1 tefach altogether for the ropes to get to up to the height of 10, right? Am I making sense here? Right? How thick do the ropes have to be in order to get to 10 tefachim height? If you have 3 tefach gaps, so you have 3 plus x plus 3 plus x plus 3 plus x. So x, so 3x would, 3x just needs to be 1 or 1 and a bit, right? So you don't need a full tefach for each x, for each rope. So Gemara says, "V'tizbra, is that what you think?" So where would you put a gap of 4 tzvachim? 1 second. What's the oh yeah. So like you're saying it would be invalid if it had a gap of more than 3 tzvachim, right? Let's say call it 4 tzvachim. Where would you put that gap? What's your scenario? If it's the bottom section is the 4 tefach gap, then the goats can crawl in underneath. Then it's unless you're going to hold like, we're going to accept this idea that 4 tefachim is enough for the goats to pass through. So you can't put the 4 tefach gap at the bottom. If you put the 4 tefach gap at the top, so then it joins with the infinite space above, and it's like, that's not existent. And if you put the 4 tefachim gap in the middle, then no matter which way you measure, 4 plus 3, the 4 is always going to be a larger gap, right? So that shows you that if you have a gap bigger than the filled in area on either side, that's considered okay. But we know that that's not the case. That if you have the filled in part less than the gap on each side, that doesn't make a valid wall, right? So the Mishnah wouldn't make sense. So our answer is, this is what Rav Hamnu's question is. If you took here's the scenario the Mishnah is talking about. You have a solid mat, right? Like a bamboo mat, and now you're going to cut out sections of it, gaps in it. So the mat itself is 7 tefachim. And you cut out a strip of 3 tefachim, and you leave 4. And then you place that mat closer than 3 tefachim to the ground, right? So is that invalid because of the gap, or is it okay because half of your mat is still 4 tefachim filled in and only 3 tefachim open at the bottom, and the other half of the mat you've cut out a strip, so it's mostly open space? So what are you going to say about that? So that would be Rav Hamnu's question, and that's a good question. So Rav Ashi Amar mechitza tzluye baile. Here's another explanation of Rav Hamnu's question. He's talking about a suspended partition. It's not built up from the ground; it's hanging from the ceiling. Kedabamine Rabbi Tavla Merav, as Rav Tavla asked, tzluye ma'u shetatyer b'chorba. If you have a ruin and you hang a curtain from the top, right? Does that make a wall? He answered, if the wall is not attached to the ground, it's only suspended. It only works if it's over water. Because the rabbis allowed that, because otherwise, it would be much harder to build a wall over a body of water. Okay, so it's not 100% clear what Rav Hamnu's answer, or what Rav Hamnu's question is, or what we're answering, but the Gemara seems satisfied. Now the Mishnah said you can use vertical poles to surround your caravan. So Rabbi Yehuda says that only works for a caravan. But we're going to challenge that from the Mishnah. A brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda says any of these enclosures for Shabbos, the maximum it can enclose is the place where you can plant 2 sa'ah, which we've said before is 5,000 square hours, 50 by 100. Anything larger than that, none of this works. 1 second. Oh, in this statement, Rabbi Yehuda does not make a distinction between individuals and caravans, but in the Mishnah he does. Why is that? So, Kediyama Rav Nachman v'Tema Rav Bibi bar Abaye. Rav Nachman explained, "When Yisrochel litain lehen kol tzarchan." When we said that the enclosure is invalid, we're not saying that it's invalid altogether. It's just invalid for larger than what they larger than the 5,000 square amos area. Okay, which doesn't apply to a caravan. That only applies to an individual, because an individual only needs so much space to roam around. But you have a bunch of people, they need a larger space. So here too, Rabbi Yehuda's, what he says in the Mishnah, he's just trying to say that it's invalid for giving them unlimited space, but it's okay for, and that wouldn't apply to an individual. Where was this taught? It's not about this following Mishnah. Any wall that doesn't have both vertical and horizontal cross pieces is not considered a wall. According to Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda. Says, did he really say that? He also said that when you using only horizontal pieces, right, only ropes, it applies both to an individual and to a caravan. So what's the only difference between an individual and a caravan? A individual, we only allow 5,000 square amma. And two people also is not yet considered a caravan. They only get 5,000 square amma. A three-person group is a caravan, and then we expand the permissible area from 5,000 to 15,000 square amma. They need a lot more space. Now, it's interesting, it's not really indexed to how many people. What if you have 100 people in a caravan? But I guess the idea is that, you just want to allow people to get a little bit away from the group. I don't know. But anyway, it's binary. It's like either you allow 5,000 square amma for one or two people, or 15,000 for more. As long as there isn't any area that's completely open of measuring 5,000. So you can use these kind of only rope walls, only horizontal walls, but only up to the limit of the 5,000 or 15,000 amma, depending on. That's what it depends on, if it's an individual or two individuals, if you will, or a group of three or more.
It's only for cross vertical and horizontal beams, right? Because today, right, is there a limit on how big an Eruv can be?
In terms of the...
is there the outer limit of how large an Eruv can be?
Yeah, so I think this is getting into that.
Yeah.
If a populated area, then no.
Okay.
Well, there may be a limit on the number of people that are in that area, but as far as the area itself is concerned, I don't think there is a limit. But if it's an open area, then I think you can't enclose. And I think one of the issues with Manhattan, and there's a lot of controversy about Manhattan Eruvs, is Central Park, because that's a large open area. So I'm not sure what all the ins and outs are of how that's dealt with. But there are opinions that Manhattan is really not, for a couple of possible reasons, is really not Eruv.
Not because it's too big, though.
Right, but it could. One of the issues is that it has too much open space in it. Okay, so the populated spaces, it doesn't matter. That can be as big as you want, but the open space might be a problem.
Can an island be an Eruv in and of itself?
So I've often wondered about this. I think the answer is probably yes, but remember that it's not just the wall or the virtual wall. It's also the act of making of doing something to share the space. Now we've been obsessed with the nature of construction, but remember that there's also the part where everybody within the area has to agree to share, right? And there's a ritual for that, right? They all pitch in together to buy a meal, right? We usually use a couple of matzahs or a box of matzah or whatever. That's a communal meal. So there's that factor as well. So you can't just come to an island and say, oh, this is surrounded by water or whatever. No.
Very interesting, because I wasn't talking about the island of Australia. My kids were just up in 1,000 Islands, and they had rented actually like a B&B on an island in 1,000 Islands.
Uh-huh.
And they had, they didn't go through this process, but it's just curious. So then if you had a house or two on an island and they agreed that this was their common community, that would be then an Eruv around that island.
I'm not sure we're saying quite that yet. I mean, are we saying that?
I'm not sure. I think it would make a difference if you're the only one who owns or rents the island.
Or now can an Eruv be temporary? That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here.
So if you're renting a small island and you're the only one there, then for all intents and purposes,
I don't know, because you have to be able to share something with somebody.
No, but if you're the only one,
you're the only one.
Like in your backyard, right? If you have a fence around your backyard, you don't need to do anything else, right? It's enclosed private property. It belongs to you. That's classic Rishus HaYachid.
Right.
Right? If it's a shared courtyard, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, nice.
Okay, we'll go a little further. Amar Rav Nachman Vitem Rav Aviva Abaye. Rav Nachman said, "Lo nishracha lo yitain lahen kol tzarachan." We just read that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Maybe it's a good place to stop. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Good day.